كلية الفقه الحنفي تقدم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear brothers and dear sisters, hope the course is going very, very well for you. Hope we're digesting and understanding this topic. As you can see that it's a very interesting and very sensitive topic, and this is lesson 11. Inshallah, what we're going to be looking at in this one is we're going to continue a discussion about how the commander or the leader of the Muslim forces can encourage the people to fight well by offering them additional rewards and incentives. And there's going to be a discussion about what every fighter gets of any soldier that he manages to kill, and what he gets of that, what is included in that. That's called a salab in Arabic, so we'll be discussing that inshallah. And then after that he will finally get round to discussing how exactly is the spoils of war distributed. We've had lots of discussion that he has to do it in the Muslim land and so on, but exactly who he gives what to, how much does he distribute and so on, that's a long discussion. So inshallah, that's what we'll be looking at today. So let us begin from page 275. We're starting from page 275. We've actually covered some of that, but essentially what he's saying is that وَلَا بَأْسَ بَلْ يَنْدُبْ بِأَنْ يُنَفِّرَ الْإِمَامُ فِي حَالِ الْقِتَالِ وَقَبْلَهُ بِالْأَوْلَى. There's nothing wrong, in fact it's encouraged for the imam to offer incentives and additional rewards, definitely during the battle and even before it. So he would encourage and he would push them to with this the promise of additional rewards for fighting, and then he discusses what nafl is, which is the extra. This is so that they can get more than what they would have usually got from that one soldier or two soldiers or however many they take down, their equipment and their belongings. So he then says, فَمَنْ قَتَلَ قَتِيلًا فَلَهُ سَلَبُهُ, that whoever kills somebody, meaning in the battle, then he gets whatever their belongings are. And then later on he's going to have a discussion of what exactly is included in that in those belongings, right? So then we'll carry on with this discussion inshallah in today's lesson. Quduri says, أو يقول لسرية وهي القطعة من الجيش, or he could tell a contingent of a contingent. Sariya essentially refers to a small contingent of the larger army. So the larger army is the jaysh. They have multiple words for different formations and different sizes of army. So Sariya refers to just a small contingent or a contingent of the larger army that is gone, that is being sent maybe to do a particular mission or something like that. Say قد جعلت لكم الربع أو النصف بعد رفع الخمس. So he could even say as much as, I'm going to designate for you a quarter or even a half after deducting the 1/5, because the 1/5 is specifically for that will be discussed later, what the 1/5 is for exactly for the National Treasury. Beyond that, whatever we're going to distribute 1/4 of whatever is attained today, or 1/2 of it. لما في ذلك من تقوية القلوب, because this strengthens their resolve and their heart. وإغراء المقاتلة على المخاطرة, and it also encourages them to take risks, to really fight with a lot of valor, right? Because all of these things are encouragements, right, to go get the job done. وإظهار الجلادة, right, demonstrating their bravery, and it also gives them an encouragement to demonstrate their bravery. رغبة في ذلك, in the interest or in pursuit of that reward that's been promised to them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about this in the Quran. حَرِّضِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ عَلَى الْقِتَالِ, encourage the believers to go and fight. وَهُوَ نَوْءُ تَحْرِيضٍ, and this is obviously one type of that encouragement, so it's allowed. So you see, if you notice in all of this, there's never any foul play, there's never a discussion about mutilation, or go and just give it to them, or go and just abuse them, or it's free for all, do what you like. None of that discussion in Islamic is very, very ethical in terms of what's allowed, what's not allowed. Of course, incentivizing them to go and demonstrate and display their bravery, go and take go and do their job properly, that's completely fine, that's allowed. Then he says, وَلَا يُنَفِّلُ بَعْدَ إِحْرَازِ الْغَنِيمَةِ فِي دَارِ الْإِسْلَامِ. Once the whole thing has been done and they've captured the booty, they've mashallah acquired booty, and they've brought it back to the Darul Islam, there's no point then offering any incentives, because it's already a done deal. And لِتَأَكُّدِ حَقِّ الْغَانِمِينَ بِهَا, because already the right of those who already fought in a particular way has already become established in there. So now you can't change the parameters afterwards. وَلِذَا يُورَثُ عَنْهُمْ, because by now if any of them die, because it's become established and their portion has been technically allotted to them, right? Their inheritors would get it if they were to die. إِلَّا مِنَ الْخُمْسِ, just 1/5 cannot be divided. One fifth has to be retained. That cannot be given to the fighters regardless. لأن الرأي فيه إلى الإمام. That is purely under the discretion of the Imam. So everything else that they get, that's that could be for the people that fought. That could be for the army, for the combatants. However, the 1/5, that the discretion of that is for the Imam, and there's no right in there for the Ghanimin to say what they want. Right? وَإِذَا لَمْ يَجْعَلِ الْإِمَامُ السَّلَبَ لِلْقَاتِلِ نَفَلًا فَهُوَ مِنْ جُمْلَةِ الْغَنِيمَةِ. Now it's up to the Imam to declare that we're going to allow you to keep whatever equipment is on the person that you kill. But he doesn't have to do that. That's not an obligation. So he doesn't have to give them that. That could just be an incentive in a particular situation. Right? So if the Imam does not designate and reserve or promise the spoils that were taken directly from one of the fighters, by the killer, as a special reward, if he doesn't designate that, then that's going to become part of the general spoils. It's going to, anything that's as an equipment on the killed soldiers who have fallen in the battle from the other side, all of that equipment is going to be Malul Ghanima. It's going to be in the general spoils, right? وَالْقَاتِلُ وَغَيْرُهُ فِيهِ فِي سَلَبِهِ سَوَاءٌ. Then it doesn't matter who killed how many people. All of the fighters will get according to a particular ratio that we will be discussing later, right? In the section on how they divide this up. So if one person killed 10 people, another one killed only 2 people, the person with 10 doesn't get more if that's not what's been promised. Yes, if the commander had promised that you will get the equipment of however many people you take down, then everybody gets equivalent to how many people that they have killed. لأنه مأخوذ بقوة الجيش فيكون غنيمة لهم. And the purpose is that ultimately whatever was taken, it was done collectively speaking. Yes, maybe one person managed to kill more people, but ultimately there's a whole force behind them, because an individual going in there couldn't have done that themselves. It was obviously with the support of everybody, and the whole army as a whole was able to provide that environment for that individual or the individuals to do what they did. So that's why this will go back to the general spoils, and then after that it will be divided according to how the Imam wants among them. Right, now he's gone on to the next section, page 277, again of the Bakdash edition of the Lubab. It says, was salab, he's describing what this salab is. The salab were the belongings of the soldier you killed. وَهُوَ مَا عَلَى الْمَقْتُولِ مِنْ ثِيَابِهِ وَسِلَاحِهِ وَمَرْكَبِهِ. That's essentially whatever clothing, whatever equipment is left to them, that refers to his clothing, it refers to his weapons, and it refers to his vehicle, right? Any vehicle that they have. Likewise, anything in the vehicle, and any other tools that they have, any other gadgets that they have, any other machinery that they were carrying that was theirs, right? And anything else, any other luggage that they were carrying, all of that will become theirs, right? Will become their killers, right? Anything beyond that, that doesn't belong to them personally, or was not appointed to them personally, then that is not going to be part of the salab, as I said. And yeah, so that will go back into the general kitty. Right. Then it looks like he kind of splits this discussion up, and he doesn't have it all together in one place. He now moves on to لا تعلف الدواب من الغنيمة بعد الخروج من دار الحرب. Once you've left the Dar al-Harb, now they're on their return. They've won the war, they return, and there is all of this spoils of war that they're accompanying and they're going with them. They're not allowed to fuel their cars from that. They should fuel their own cars, essentially. They don't fuel it from the Mal al-Ghanima. So essentially for their animals, they won't graze them on anything to do with the Ghanima, because that Ghanima wealth, once you leave the Dar al-Harb, is no longer going to be free for all. It's already the general, it's the general spoils, and that everybody's right is associated with that. So that's why he says, وَإِذَا خَرَجَ الْمُسْلِمُونَ مِنْ دَارِ الْحَرْبِ, once the Muslims depart from the abode of war, لَمْ يَجُزْ لَهُمْ أَنْ يَعْرِفُوا دَوَابَهُمْ مِنَ الْغَنِيمَةِ, they're not allowed to graze their animals, and this in the modern context would mean that they won't be able to fill up the gas or the petrol from the ghanima. وَلَا يَأْكُلُوا مِنْهَا, they're also not allowed to consume any food from there. لِأَنَّ حَقَّ الْغَانِمِينَ قَدْ تَأَكَّدَ فِيهَا, they have to find some other supplies to do that with. I mean, of course, they're going to be making money from this ultimately, so they can just pay it back afterwards. They'll have to find some other means to eat. So they can't eat, because this has now become everybody's wealth in a collective sense. So some people can't be eating from there, right? وَمَنْ فَضَلَ مَعَهُ عَلَفٌ أَوْ طَعَامٌ رَدَّهُ الْغَنِيمَةِ. Now, having said that, while they were in the abode of war, they were allowed to consume and feed their animals and their vehicles from there. So let's just say they had some supplies with them, and now they've come out into towards the Darul Islam. They're out of Darul Harb right now, and they've got the extra part. They're not allowed to use that up either. They will have to return that into the general spoils as well. وَبَعْدَ الْقِسْمَةِ تَصَدَّقُوا بِهِ إِنْ كَانُوا أَغْنِيَا. Now, what happens if somebody retained some equipment or some supplies and forgot about them, or came late or whatever, and by the time they got back, the general spoils had already been divided? Now, clearly this part had to be divided as well, but it was not there, it was not present, because this person wasn't present. Now it's going to be very difficult to divide it among everyone, because it means calling everybody back, and there could be thousands of people. So what they do is tasaddaqu bihi in kanu aghniya. If these people are wealthy now and they're considered wealthy, because they would have probably also received their own share, right? Now the part that was left over with them, that's not theirs, that belongs to everybody. So if they are now considered wealthy and not entitled to zakat, for example, right, they would have to give sadaqah of this and give it away in charity. However, if they are needy themselves and they are entitled to zakat, then they can benefit from this. لأنه صار في حكم اللقطة, because in this case it will become like something that is newly found, and when a person finds something that that you can't find the owner of, and in this case we know that the owners are so, there has to be divided among thousands of people, and it's too difficult to do that. So in that case, then where you don't find an owner, or it's difficult to give it back to an owner, then a poor person is allowed to consume that themselves, because of the difficulty of returning it to where it should go. Okay, but if they're wealthy, they'll have to give it in sadaqah. Okay, alhamdulillah. The next section he discusses bayanu qismatil ghanima. Fine, you've been waiting for this, I've been mentioning this, that how do they actually then divide the spoils of war, the general spoils? How do they divide it? Who gets what? What's the share? What's the proportion? ويقسم الإمام الغنيمة بعد الإحراز بدار الإسلام كما تقدم فيخرج أولا خمسها للأصناف الثلاثة الآتية. So the Imam, this is page 278, the Imam will start to distribute the spoils of war after it has been fully secured in the Darul Islam, as has been mentioned before. Firstly, he will exclude from there and separate from there the 1/5 of the entire thing, make it into 5 sections, and 20% he will separate. That is given to 3 categories of people, which we'll be discussing right now. That will be separate, Imam's discretion to give it to 3 categories, and that essentially, just to let you know briefly, it's going to be for the orphans. So the 1/5 of all the spoils of war are always distributed among the orphans, the poor people in general, and anybody who is considered abna'us sabil. That refers to people who that would be probably a bit difficult today to find such people, but it's still a possibility that there may be somebody who's wealthy somewhere else, but they have no access to that wealth. So they're poor in the sense of their immediate needs. They don't have access, right, for the next so many days, because they've lost all of their cards. They're in another country. They can't contact anybody, or they're going to need some major proof of proof, and they just don't have that right now. They may be in another country. Those are abna'us sabil. So it's for people like them as well. So the poor people, the orphans, and those people, right? That's just in brief. Now, وَيَقْسِمُ أَرْبَعَةَ أَخْمَاسِهَا. What about the other 80%, right? The 4/5 of it that are بَيْنَ الْغَانِمِينَ. That has to be distributed between the fighters. لِلْفَارِسِ. Now how that works is لِلْفَارِسِ أي لِصَاحِبِ الْفَرَسِ سَهْمَانِ. So they will probably count everybody there. They will then enumerate how many people were on foot and how many people went with a vehicle. In those days it was with a horse, with an animal. So let's just say that there were 500 people with on a horseback or with another animal, whereas there were 500 people that fought on foot because they didn't have a horse, because you go with whatever access you have. Nowadays with the armies, they will probably give you equipment, so they probably do this differently, right? But in those days, you went with your, because they never had like in those days they probably didn't have uniforms and all of this kind of thing. You went with your own battle. Maybe later they had armies where they gave them, and so there's probably a different way that they will equate this, but this is where you went with your own, whatever you committed of your own assets, you will be given proportionately. So essentially a person on horseback, that's the cavalry, right? They get double a portion of what infantry gets. So let's just say that there were 500 cavalry, and there were 500 infantry, there were 500 people on foot. That means they would probably make 1,500 shares. They would distribute that into 1,500, because every horseback person would get 2 shares and every person on foot would receive 1 share. So that's how they do it. That's why it says وَيَقْسِمُ أَرْبَعَةَ أَخْمَاسِهَا الْبَاقِيَ بَيْنَ الْغَانِمِ الْفَارِسِ أي لِصَاحِبِ الْفَرَسِ سَهْمَانِ. For every horseback person, he gets 2 shares. وَلِلْرَاجِلِ سَهْمٌ. According to Abu Hanifa, he gets 1 portion. However, there is a difference of opinion in this regard. Sahibain, they say لِلْفَارِسِ ثَلَاثَةُ أَسْهُمٍ. They give actually 3 shares to each person on horseback and only 1 to the person on foot. That means that they would have to, if that number that I mentioned, 500, they would actually make 2,000 shares then, out of which 1,500 shares would be divided as 3 shares each to each of the 500 people on horseback, and then 1 share each of the remaining 500 after the 1,500 was given, 500 for the 500 infantry people, the fighters on foot. So I hope that's very clear. And of course, multiple people consider Imam Abu Hanifa's opinion to be sahih, and this is what Burhani, Nasafi, Sadr Shari and others have also chosen. What happens if a person takes 2 horses, 2 cars? Does he get extra? Says no. وَلَا يُسْهِمُ إِلَّا لِفَرَسٍ وَاحِدٍ. The equation works with just 1 horse, and you take more, that's cool, you can take more, but you only get for 1 horse, essentially. لأن القتال لا يتحقق إلا على فرس واحد. Because ultimately you only use 1 horse for your fighting. You might have jumped on another one, but ultimately you're always on 1 horse at once. You're not on 2 horses. Like with a vehicle, you're not going to be sitting in 2 vehicles at once, right? Now, if you lent your horse to somebody else and he got a double share for that, you can negotiate with him, I guess. That's up to you. Because for him being on horseback, he'll probably get double the share now, right? Or 3 shares according to the Sahibain. Well, you can have a negotiation with him that I gave you the horse, so maybe you give me a portion. But that's different, right? You take 2 horses, you take 2 cars, you'll only get for just that one single car. And this is Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Muhammad's opinion. Imam Abu Yusuf differs in this regard. He says that if you take 2 horses, you should get double a horse's share. However, the Tarafain, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Abu Muhammad's view is the Sahih one. That is what the Imams that I mentioned earlier also go by. Allahu Akbar. Now, there's a discussion regarding different types of horses, right? There's different horses, they all have different types of capabilities. So, he's saying Al-Baradhin, Jam'u Birdaun, which is a Turkish horse. And that is Wal-Itaq, or Ataq, Jam'u Atiqin, is the Arab horses. So, the Ataq or Itaq is the Ataq, I think, is the purebred Arab horse, and the Baradhin is the Turkish horse. One is more agile, one is more faster for quick attacks, the other one has more endurance. There's a discussion, one is longer, one is bigger, one is smaller. So anyway, in this regard, in terms of how many shares they get, you're going to get the same share. For all people on horseback will get the same share, regardless of you got some purebred horse or you've got one from, an Arab horse or an American horse or whatever it is. لأن اسم الخيل ينطلق على الكل, because the title or the name of a good steed, right, of a steed, applies to all of them. والإرهاب مضاف إليها, and the notion, right, in those days the horses, depending how they were, they instilled fear. It created horses were a formidable sight on a battlefield, especially with the sounds they made and so on. So he's saying that's going to be that impression is going to be created by a Turkish horse and an Arab horse. So the effect of it is going to be the same. Yes, individually for each person, how they perform is going to be different, right? Their performance might be different, but in terms of what it's doing for the enemy, it's the same thing. وَلِأَنَّ الْعَرَبِيَّةِ, now he discusses the distinctions between the two. وَلِأَنَّ الْعَرَبِيَّةِ إِنْ كَانَ فِي الطَّلَبِ وَالْهَرَبِ أَقْوَى فَالْبِرْذَوْنَ أَصْبَرُ وَأَلْيَنُ عَطَفًا فَمِنْ كُلِّ مِنْهُمَا مَنْفَعَةٌ مُعْتَبَرَةٌ فَاسْتَوَيَا. So there's pros and cons of each one. So he's saying that when it comes to the Arab horse, it's very good for pursuit and for escape. It's much stronger in that because it's very swift and very quick to do that. Whereas the Turkish horse is a lot more resilient and it's a lot more gentle in its temperament. Right? So a lot more gentle in temperament and much more resilient. So it can take a lot more beating essentially, but it's not maybe as fast and swift in terms of turning around and going places as the Arab one is. I mean, it's decent enough. So each one of them has a notable benefit. So they're going to be treated equal in terms of the incentive you get for each one. Alright. Now what happens if somebody takes another saddle animal for them to put other people on or whatever? Saying, وَلَا يُسْهِمْ لِرَاحِلَةٍ, the Amir cannot give a special portion for a saddle animal. Right? Like for example a camel, if there's somebody takes, whether it's male or female, nor for a mule or a donkey, right? So if a person goes with a camel, if a person goes with a donkey, they don't get the same as a horse. They actually get the same as being on foot because those animals aren't fast enough. So there's no additional benefit there is in the sense that it's easier for you to go. But what are you going to do in battle with a camel except to just have something to sit on and to laden your stock on? So that's why he's saying that they're going to be the same as people on foot. So it's only the horse that we're talking about. As I said, in the modern world, it's probably going to be based on what kind of equipment you have. But again, this is all going to be in the budget of the army and how they deal with it. So I don't know if anybody's going to take anything. How this applies, I'm not sure in terms of the modern world. They will probably figure out something of how. It may be that those people who fight on foot get something. Those people who are able to fly planes get something else because they do a lot more damage, unfortunately, right? Or fortunately, it just depends how you see that, right? But he deals with certain other scenarios related to this. So he says, وَمَنْ دَخَلَ دَارَ الْحَرْبِ فَارِسًا فَنَفَقَ أَيْ هَلَقَ فَرَسُهُ فَشَهِدَ الْوَقْعَةَ رَاجِلًا اسْتَحَقَّ سَهْمَ فَارِسٍ. The poor guy, he went in with a horse, but then the horse perished there. So then he had to do everything on foot. So this person will actually get, in terms of the spoils of war, he will actually get the portion of a horseback person. And likewise, on the other hand, وَمَنْ دَخَلَ رَاجِلٍ, whoever entered the area into the abode of war on foot, but then فَاشْتَرَى هُنَاكَ فَرَسًا, managed to buy a horse there, فَشَهِدَ الْوَقْعَةَ فَارِسًا, and then he was involved in the battle on a horse, استحق سهم رَاجِلٍ. Ya Allah, this person actually gets this person will only get the portion of a person on foot. So what matters is how you go in and what you take in with you, right? If you buy something there later, that doesn't make a difference. In الوقوف على حقيقة القتال متعسر, because it says ultimately how you fought on the day is very difficult to figure out what's the reality of that, right? How much you use your horse, when did you buy your horse, and so on. If you didn't go in and you were not registered as having been on horseback, when you were first drafted in, then you don't get that benefit. Of course, you can go and buy a horse and have it as a benefit for yourself because it'll help you move around faster, right? You might get more people and be able to earn more salab, which means that more equipment from the people that you kill. But other than that, in terms of the final ghanima, you don't get that, right? You don't get that. So وَكَذَا شُهُودُ الْوَقَى, we don't know what happens in a battle. It's just such a complicated and chaotic place to be. So then how do you decide that you bought a horse and so on at that time? So that's why فَتُقَامُ الْمُجَاوَزَ مَقَامَهُ, that's why just crossing over into enemy lands with a horse or without a horse, that's what we're going to look at, right? لأن السبب المفضي إليه ظاهرا إن كان على قصد القتال فيعتبر حال الشخص حالة المجاوزة فارسا راجلا. So that's why however you're drafted in with, whatever you went in with, that is what is going to be considered. إعطاء الرضخ لمن لا سهم له ولا يسهم لمملوك ولا مكاتب ولا امرأة ولا ذمي ولا صبي ولا مجنون ولا معتوه ولكن يرضخ لهم أن يعطيه من الغنيمة على حسب ما يراه الإمام. Now, these were the men that they were talking about, right? These were the men. This is not referring to, for example, the women or the slaves or the dhimmis that might have assisted in this battle. They don't have a fixed share. The Imam can give them whatever he wants based on his discretion at the time and whatever the requirement is and whatever he has available, right? And that could be a lot. I mean, it could be whatever. It could be just, it doesn't mean it's going to have to be less. It's just that they don't have a fixed allotted amount. That's why he's saying that he will not give he will not provide a share to any kind of slave, nor to women if they've taken part, nor to non-Muslim dhimmis who've assisted. And yes, there's been many cases, many battles in which the non-Muslim citizens or non-Muslim residents of the Muslim lands actually fought alongside them to assist because they didn't want to change their faith, but they knew this was the best option for them, right? And nor for children who took part, or nor for any insane person or a feeble-minded person. وَلَكِنْ يَرْضَخُ لَهُمْ, however, he will give them something, meaning he will give them something of the spoils of war based on whatever he deems fit. So that would be another portion taken out as well to give to them. That's why he mentions in the Hidayah, ثُمَّ الْعَبْدُ إِنَّمَا يُرْضَخُ لَهُ إِذَا قَاتَلْ لِأَنَّهُ دَخَلَ لِخِدْمَةِ الْمَوْلَى فَصَارَ كَالتَّاجِرِ. Again, the slave is only given something if he actually fights. Otherwise, he's there just to serve his master, make stuff for him, prepare food for him or whatever. Maybe that's what he was doing. Maybe he wasn't fighting. So if he does fight, then he gets something, then he becomes a combatant. وَالْمَرْأَةُ يُرْضَخُ لَهُ إِذَا كَانَتْ تَدَاوِي الْجَرْحَ. Women will be entitled to something if they are performing certain functions, like they are seeing to the wounded, وَتَقُومُ عَلَى الْمَرْضَى, or looking after the sick, because maybe they don't have the capability to actually do the physical fighting, but these kind of other services they can easily provide, and that obviously is that stands in place of their fighting. They're doing as much as they can, so they should get something as well. And likewise, if a non-Muslim resident of a Muslim land fights for them, he also gets something. Or for example, if he tells you which way to go, or he assists in some way or the other, because there's a benefit for the Muslims, so why not? So pay them as well. Likewise, they're saying that it just depends on how much assistance they give. So if he gave really critical information, told them a particular way to go because maybe he is from that country originally and he knows, the shortcuts, or knows the secret passages or secret tunnels or whatever it is, then he can be given a lot more for that regard. Right? So it's whatever's worth. It's up to the discretion of the person. وَأَمَّا الْخُمْسُ. Now he's going to discuss in detail the 1/5 that was taken out first. Who gets that? So وَأَمَّا الْخُمْسُ فَيُقْسَمْ عَلَى ثَلَاثَةِ أَسْهُمٍ. That will be divided into 3 portions. سَهْمٌ لِلْيَتَامَى. One of them is going to be for the orphans. Now, where do we get this distribution from? This is what's been related from the 4 khulafa that we had: Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali radiyallahu anhum. And this was actually done this way in the presence of the Sahaba, and nobody protested against that or changed it in any way. So that is seen as a consensus and an ijma' that this is what we do. Right? So the 3 sections. The second portion of that will be for the general poor, meaning people who are entitled to zakat. وَسَهْمٌ لِأَبْنَاءِ السَّبِيلِ. And there's going to be a section that is for, I've already explained to you, أَبْنَاءُ السَّبِيلِ, which means people who've been cut away and stranded from their wealth, so they don't have access to that, so they're struggling right now. It doesn't have to be, it's not obligatory to give it to all 3 if there's no need. For example, you may not have Abna'u Sabil. You may not have anybody stranded like that. And even if it is probably going to be a few, I mean, do you expect like thousands of people? No. Earlier on, you would have that because there was no means of electronic payments, no phones, no communication ability, no credit cards, and so on. So in those days, you could understand that they may be in another area. They don't have money to go back because they were robbed. For example, they got lots of money maybe in their home village or hometown, which is maybe 2 days journey away. What are they going to do? Are they going to be forced to work? They might want to, but they could actually take zakat as well. So anyway, that's them. So they're probably not going to have too many of those people. That's why وَيَجُوزُ صَرْفُهُ لِنِصْفٍ وَصِنْفٍ وَاحِدٍ. It's completely permissible for the Imam just to give it to the orphans because that was maybe the need of the time, or just to the poor. ويدخل فقراء ذوي القربى من بني هاشم فيهم أي في الأصناف الثلاثة ولكن يقدمون على غيرهم لعدم جواز الصدقة عليهم. Now here, these are not necessarily only people who can be given sadaqah and zakat. While that is the primary and the main portion of people, however, there's one additional group of people that are included in here as long as they're poor. So this is the poor of the family of the Prophet ﷺ, of the Banu Hashim. The descendants of the Banu Hashim, they're not allowed to accept zakat even if they're poor. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them a special portion, so they get from this 1/5. And they're actually given priority among all the poor people, that if there's a certain amount of money that was accumulated through this 1/5, and then there are multiple types of poor people, they will be given preference because they can't receive normal zakat, whereas the other poor people can receive normal zakat. So that's why these people are given a preference for this 1/5 of the spoils of war, right? That they be given preference in that regard. وَلَا يُدْفَعْ إِلَىٰ أَغْنِيَائِهِمْ مِنْهُ شَيْئًا لِأَنَّهُ إِنَّمَا يَسْتَحَقُ بِالْفَقْرِ وَالْحَاجَةِ. It's not allowed to give the wealthy anything because this is only for the poor among them, right? So you can't give anything to the wealthy among them if they didn't fight. They would get a portion for fighting. That would be a different issue. This is which comes out of the 1/5, which is dedicated or reserved for the poor and so on. Now, he's gonna discuss the Quranic verse related to this, which we'll discuss inshallah in our conclusion. So to conclude this lesson, just gonna summarize what we discussed today. The first thing that we discussed was that Imam, the commander, can encourage with more incentives the fighters so that they do better work there, right? And he can say that I'm going to give you half of the spoils, or meaning among them, and so on. And then none of this, so they're not allowed to take any of this before it's taken and secured in the Darul Islam, as we mentioned, right? Now, the other thing was that anything that remains is going to be for everybody. So the equipment on any fighter that was killed by the Muslim fighter, they get to keep that. So if they killed 10 people, they get to keep all of the equipment. So we discussed what was included in there. Then we have that once the Muslims have left the Darul Harb and they're on their way back, they're not allowed to use any of the common spoils, because that it belongs to everybody. They were allowed to use it while they were in the Darul Harb, because there you wouldn't expect them to get supplies from anywhere else, so they were able to use that. But once they get out and the Darul Islam, so now it's going to be for everybody, so they can't take any of that. If they've kept some aside from before and they found out later, they would have to give that in sadaqah. They can't keep that themselves unless they're poor, then they can keep it themselves. The Imam will first take out 1/5, right, and then he will divide the 4 sections up of the spoils of war, of the common spoils of war, and he'll give every horseback person, anybody who went in with a horse, he'll give them 2 portions each, and he will give 1 portion to anybody who was on any other animal or who was on foot, right? Likewise, when it comes to, we learnt about this difference between the Arabic and the Turkish horse, that the Arab horse is more swift and good at going in and out and pursuing somebody, whereas the Turkish horse is much more enduring and a lot more easier to deal with, better temperament. And then then we had a discussion about if the women or slaves or children or majnoon or even a non-Muslim assist in this regard, the Imam will give them something, though they don't have an allotted share that is binding. The Imam gives them according to discretion whatever he thinks is appropriate. Then the discussion was that the 1/5 of the spoils of war that is extracted right from the beginning, that is for the poor people, that is for the poor people, the orphans, and is for anybody who's stranded and doesn't have access to their money. And among them, the best people to give it to is especially the family of the Prophet ﷺ, who are poor because they can't take zakat. So they're given preference in that regard as well. So that was the discussion in today's lesson, and inshallah we'll clarify the rest of this discussion inshallah in the next lesson. We'll see you then inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.